genetic gifts owing to the Balkan Semitic lineage of my great-grandmother, rather than to any inheritance of an Aryan bent. He whispered a few inquiries to the doctors whom I served, and I was promptly whisked away to a new position and adventures I had not dreamed of or wanted. I was thankful, however, for having come to Himmel's side at this latter stage of his commando career, because throughout the war, his resume had been quickly filled up with daring raids against Allied troops, mountaintop rescues of captured officers, and the long-range executions of enemy generals. The colonel had a tendency to reward his support staff by insisting they accompany him on most such ventures, and so a long list of previous adjutants, company clerks, and even cooks had been killed in action on a number of fronts. My recruitment to the colonel's staff in 1943 somewhat lessened the odds of my falling prey to foreign shellfire while shining the commander's jackboots, but it was, in any event, a nerve-wracking assignment. You see, Himmel had been twice awarded the Iron Cross, as well as the Knight's Cross, for exemplary valor, on one occasion by Adolf Hitler himself. I shall briefly digress to say that I am not proud to have been in attendance for that ceremony, but it was most certainly a surreal dinner soirée I shall never forget, for it is seared upon my mind's eye. The awardees, more than 200 officers from various branches of the Wehrmacht, Kriegsmarine, and Luftwaffe, were invited to the Eagle's Lair at Berchtesgaden. Of course, I use the term invited with tongue-in-cheek, for these weary men were ordered to appear on the given eve, despite their presently distant locations or battlefield predicaments. Thus, the towering antechamber of Hitler's Schloss was awash with men in dress uniforms. Yet one must realize that so many of these previously perfectly tailored tunics and jodhpurs had been stowed now for years in panzer tanks, Heinkel bombers, or U-boats. The courageous officers had done their best to shine cracked boots, polish rusted buckles, and steam the wrinkles from moth-eaten wools. Yet even so, it all appeared much like a costume ball in the 10th level of hell. The submariners' beards were badly trimmed, the Luftwaffe's pilots' eyes gleamed with fatigue, and some of the infantry heroes actually had caked spots of blood on their cuffs and lapels, as their most recent wounds still oozed. I hardly think now that many of them remained ardent worshippers of their Führer, yet, like Roman legionnaires in the presence of Caesar, they managed to affect erect spines and the gunshot clicks of heels. Hitler was customarily late, by, I believe, at least 2 hours, and I shall never forget his demeanor when he finally appeared. He seemed, quite frankly, completely surprised and subsequently annoyed. He behaved like a man whose wife has invited guests to dinner without his consent, and it was only when Goering whispered a reminder in his ear that he dredged up the manners to stay the course. So quickly did he dispense the medals, with scarcely a complimentary word and absently offering that embarrassingly limp handshake of his, that I imagined his primary motive here was to finish with it and hurry to the toilet. Of course, had I shared my view with a single soul, including any other young adjutant or even a castle cook, I most certainly would have found myself immediately en route to Smolensk, or worse. However, just after the Führer's departure, I offered Colonel Himmel a champagne glass from a silver tray and congratulated him for his courage, which I had too often personally witnessed, along with an accompanying clutch of my sphincter. The colonel received his drink, nodded his gratitude, and then very briefly rolled his single eye. He smiled at me for a millisecond and quickly issued me an order of some kind, yet the moment had been shared. For an assassin, a brigand, a tyrant, and a thief, my master did have his good points. To me, Himmel's most endearing quality was that he never fully inquired as to my background. During the pre-war years and throughout the conflict, it was incumbent upon elite Nazi officers to fully vet each member of their command, despite the assumption that the Gestapo had already done so. Yet Himmel had always been a career combatant, regarding Hitler's anti-Semitic diatribes as nothing more than a rallying point around which to galvanize the populace. Having not a bone of fear in his body, he dismissed the regulatory racial codes with a snort.